Hi there, Phil the Practical Gardener again. This particular tip is about crop rotation. Now when I read books about vegetable gardening, quite often they recommend quite elaborate processes of rotating your crops around different parts of your garden, partly to avoid the transmission of pests and diseases between the crops, and also so that the nutrients that are particularly removed from the soil by one crop will be replenished by the next one. For instance, if sweet corn is followed by a legume, then the legume will replenish the nitrogen in the soil. And studies have shown that there can be an increase of 10 to 25% in the rate of cropping if crop rotation is practiced. However, these studies are carried out on commercial operations, which are quite different from yours and mine. So, for example, market gardens that I've seen, to remove the risk of transmission of soil-borne fungal diseases from one brassica crop to a following one, they will simply lease an area of land on a short-term basis to grow their brassicas crop. If there is a risk of fungal disease building up in that soil, they simply remove the lease and it will go back into pasture or some other crop that won't be affected. Because it will take around about 10 years to free that soil up, and that just isn't realistic for you and me, because brassicas are a crop that takes up quite a lot of room, so we might give over 15, 20 or 30% of our area to brassica crops such as broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, and this also includes things like swede and radish. So it's impractical to actually keep an area of soil free from that for up to 10 years. Also, quite often we grow crops in a specialised part of our garden. For example, we might have a bean frame and we want to use that same bean frame for growing beans for quite a number of years. Another example is this tomato house that I have here. This is a specialised house which is designed to prevent entry of pest and disease into it, and it is very successful. It would be impractical for me to move this to a different area. Now when I've finished the crop, I do remove the stems and the roots, and I actually move them right away from the vegetable growing area. I use them as a mulch on my orchard area or a waste area of my garden, so that there isn't a risk of transmission back into the garden. However, I don't actually move the tomato bed from one area to another year from year. It does make sense to carry out some informal degree of rotation from one area to another. For example, I grow significant crops of beetroot and onions, and they have similar requirements, a high need for sunlight, similar needs for nutrients, and also they take up quite a big area. I simply swap the beds over from one year to another. So if this is the beetroot bed one year and onion this year, next year I'll swap them over and I'll have beetroot on the one that was in the onions the previous year, just as a little bit of a precaution. However, I don't think you need to go to any more trouble than that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the reasons for crop rotation based on the two main explanations. One is nutrient transference or removal of nutrients from one crop to another, and the second one is soil-borne pests and diseases. So let's talk about it. Firstly, pest and disease control. Pests and diseases can be specific to certain crops. In theory, by rotating your crop, you will reduce this. However, in the urban environment, insects can fly into your crops from neighbouring beds or properties with ease. Similarly, fungal spores are constantly carried in the air, ready for an opportunity to infect your crop. Also, you're often growing crops together in the same bed. The main form of transmission that you do have some ability to control is soil-carried pests and diseases, which can remain in the soil for years and only attack the crop by directly infecting the roots from the soil. Where there is a risk of this, you should remove all crop remnants from the plot, as I do for these tomatoes and capsicums. Key examples, apart from tomatoes and capsicums, are cucumbers. All of these carry virus and fungal diseases within their dead stems and roots, so don't even risk composting these. I don't put them into the refuse bin, as I mentioned before. I use them as a coarse mulch around fruit trees or at the back of my garden bed, where there is no risk of transmission of soil-borne pests and diseases into the garden bed. Another risk situation is brassicas, where continuous cropping can favour the build-up of clubroot. In this case, I ensure that my seedlings are grown directly in potting media and punnets, rather than starting them in the soil. This will prevent the introduction of the clubroot organism. Now, the second reason for crop rotation is nutrients. The remains of vegetable crops are rich in nutrients and also add to the levels of organic matter in the soil. I leave remnants from crops that aren't at high risk of carrying root diseases, such as sweet corn, salad plants and beetroot, on the ground under my chop and drop regime. Alternatively, they can be dug into the plot or composted. This efficient return of nutrients means that crop rotation would be of little additional benefit to me. Legumes have nodules on their roots that host bacteria that fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. In theory, this nutrient is then available for the following crops. On this basis, it could be beneficial to grow nitrogen-demanding crops in the same plot in the year following. These would include leafy green crops such as lettuce, silver beet or chard, and mustard crops. However, with legumes such as peas, beans and broad or flava beans, we remove most of this nitrogen when we harvest the crop, so therefore we don't really get much benefit. Transferring the crop remnants to the beds selected for these plants or composting will have much the same benefit. So I hope that you get some idea about how you can do a casual form of crop rotation within your garden without going to some elaborate schedule. Now, just a reminder that I have actually got 25 different topic areas that I'm discussing in these tips, and I'm working my way through them, and it would be of your benefit to look at the ones that I have regarding soils, such as composting or mulching, as well as the ones that I'm showing on vegetables. Within the vegetable section, I have quite a number on different vegetable crops. However, I've also most of my way through the ones about the general aspects about the best way to look after your vegetable beds, such as companion planting or cropping through the year. So I do suggest that you look at these so that you get the full benefit from them. Also, of course, it is great if you share my channel with other people and like this video. And finally, of course, as always, thank you very much for watching this through to the end.